Washington says it hit more than 80 targets. Tehran says the Gulf is no longer safe for American power. So why does every U.S. strike seem to make the map more dangerous right now? That is the contradiction at the center of this crisis. On paper, America still has the overwhelming advantage: aircraft, destroyers, satellites, bases, missile defenses, and the ability to strike across the region with precision. If this were only a contest of firepower, the conclusion would look simple. Washington hits, Iran absorbs, and deterrence is restored, but the Gulf does not work like a normal battlefield. One missile launch, one damaged tanker, one radar warning, one unconfirmed claim about an aircraft or drone can move markets, shake capitals, and force every government from Riyadh to Beijing to calculate risk again. Iran does not need to defeat the United States in a conventional war to create pressure. It only needs to make American control feel expensive, unstable, and politically dangerous. The detail most people missed is that this is not just a strike exchange. It is a test of who controls the cost of escalation. America can punish Iran, but Iran can still make the Gulf feel unsafe. But before we decide whether Iran is losing or winning, we need to understand the story mainstream coverage is telling. The mainstream version is easy to understand, and that is why it spreads. Iran attacks commercial shipping near the Strait of Hormuz. Washington says it cannot allow a global energy chokepoint to become a shooting gallery. American forces retaliate. Tehran claims it has answered back. Gulf states raise alerts, air defenses move, markets react, and suddenly the language of ceasefire gives way to the language of escalation. In that version, the story is simple. Iran has gone out of control, America is restoring deterrence, and the Gulf is the stage where force must answer force. And to be clear, that version is not imaginary. Public American statements have described attacks on commercial vessels. Regional reporting has described rising military alerts and concern across Gulf capitals. Oil markets often react when the Strait of Hormuz appears threatened because the map is sensitive. A narrow waterway can become a global economic signal, but that is still only the surface. The part mainstream coverage skipped is not the explosion. It is the logic behind the escalation. Why would Iran keep pushing in a zone where America can strike so hard? Why would Washington hit dozens of targets and still face a wider crisis? And why does every response seem to pull more actors into the calculation? That surface narrative leads to the wrong question, and the wrong question produces the wrong answer. Mainstream media is asking the wrong question. It keeps asking, can America stop Iran? That sounds logical because America has the aircraft, the ships, the intelligence network, the sanctions machine, and the regional bases. If the question is only whether Washington can hit Iranian-linked targets, the answer is obvious. The machinery of American power is built for exactly that kind of targeted operation. Yes, it can. It has done it before, and it can do it again. But the real question is different. Has Iran made the cost of stopping it too high? That is where the story changes. Because stopping Iran is not the same as striking Iran. A strike can destroy a launcher, a radar site, a drone facility, or a patrol boat. But stable control requires something larger. It requires safe shipping lanes, calm oil markets, confident Gulf partners, protected bases, and a belief that escalation is manageable. The question nobody is asking is whether deterrence is being restored or slowly consumed. If Iran claims retaliation, Gulf air defenses go on alert, energy traders price in risk, and Washington prepares another round of military action, then the battlefield is no longer just physical. It becomes psychological and economic. Iran may be weaker, but it is forcing the stronger power to react across multiple systems at once. To answer that, we need a framework that explains why a weaker power would deliberately fight near a global choke point. The framework for this crisis is the Gulf pressure chamber. It means Iran does not have to dominate the region in the way America dominates the region. It does not need carrier groups, global bases, or a blue water navy. Its strategy may be smaller, but also more dangerous. Heat several systems at the same time until every American move creates a new pressure point of conflict. There are 5 layers inside this chamber. The first is military pressure. Drones, missiles, coastal radar, small boats, air defense alerts, and the constant risk of another strike cycle. The second is maritime pressure. The feeling that commercial shipping can no longer move through the Gulf without calculating danger. The third is energy pressure. Oil and liquefied natural gas flows passing through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow channel where local violence can become a global price signal. The fourth is diplomatic pressure. Gulf states relying on American protection while fearing that American protection may also make them targets. And the fifth is psychological pressure, the image of control itself. Iran cannot fully control all 5 layers, but it may not need to. It only needs to heat them together. One vessel incident can affect insurance. One missile alert can affect diplomacy. One American strike can restore deterrence in one place while raising escalation fears in another. That is why the map matters. The U.S. Fifth Fleet sits in Bahrain. Gulf economies depend on open sea lanes. A significant share of global traded energy moves through Hormuz. So what changes if Iran's goal is not victory, but permanent pressure? Now we can break the crisis into 4 strategic moves, starting with the geography. Strategic move 1, Iran turns geography into a weapon. To understand Iran's leverage, you have to begin with the map. The Strait of Hormuz is not an empty ocean where American naval power can operate with unlimited space and clean lines of movement. It is narrow, crowded, watched from nearby coastlines, and surrounded by states whose economies depend on every ship passing through without fear. That geography changes the meaning of power. In open water, the United States can project force with distance, depth, and overwhelming technology. Near Hormuz, the battlefield compresses. Small boats can appear quickly. Coastal radars can track movement. Anti-ship missiles can be hidden, moved, or launched from shore. Drones can test defenses. Mines, even the suspicion of mines, can slow traffic and force expensive clearing operations. A single incident can make every captain, insurer, trader, and government ask the same question: is the route still safe? Iran does not need to sink an American fleet to create strategic pressure. It does not even need to close the strait completely. It only needs to make shipping appear risky enough that the commercial system begins pricing danger into every decision long before a formal blockade is even officially announced. That is the detail most people miss. The cost nobody wants to calculate is not the cost of one missile. It is the cost of uncertainty in a choke point. When insurance rises, when tanker routes are reconsidered, when naval escorts become necessary, and when oil markets react before all facts are even confirmed, geography has already become a weapon. This is why American strikes on radar sites, anti-ship capabilities, and small boat networks matter. They are not just attacks on hardware, they are attempts to reduce Iran's ability to weaponize the coastline itself. But geography alone is not enough. A narrow strait gives Iran opportunity, but opportunity must still be converted into pressure. That is where the second move begins, forcing America to spend expensive power against cheaper threats. Strategic move 2, the asymmetric cost trap. The second strategic move is the asymmetric cost trap. This is where the crisis stops being measured only in explosions and starts being measured in economics. Iran does not need systems equal to America's systems. It needs systems cheap enough, mobile enough, and repeatable enough to force America into expensive patterns of defense and retaliation. A drone can be launched from a concealed site. A small boat can test a shipping lane. A mobile launcher can appear, fire, and disappear. Coastal radar can feed targeting information. Even when these systems are destroyed, the strategic question remains: how much did the United States have to spend, deploy, and risk in order to destroy them? America's response structure is far more advanced, but it is also far more expensive. Aircraft need bases, tankers, maintenance crews, munitions, intelligence, and political permission. Destroyers need logistics. Carrier groups require protection. Missile defense systems may fire interceptors that cost far more than the drones or rockets they are meant to defeat. An MQ-9 claim, if confirmed, would matter not because one platform decides a war, but because it would symbolize the economics of attrition, cheap pressure forcing expensive exposure. That is the quiet logic inside this confrontation. Iran may not be trying to win a clean military exchange. It may be trying to create a cycle where Washington must respond again and again and again, each time spending more, risking more, and pulling more assets into the theater. The signal hidden inside the timing is that Iran may be testing how many times Washington is willing to pay the price of response. That pressure becomes heavier when every response must reassure allies while avoiding a wider regional war or sudden miscalculation. This does not make Iran stronger than America, but it may make the battlefield less comfortable for American power. Once cost becomes the battlefield, the third move is political, turning Gulf bases into pressure points. Strategic move 3, Gulf bases become political targets. American power in the Gulf does not float by itself. It rests on a hidden architecture: bases, ports, airfields, intelligence stations, logistics corridors, overflight permissions, fuel depots, radar networks, and the consent of host governments. Without that structure, American aircraft fly farther, ships operate under more strain, and every military option becomes slower, harder, and more politically visible. This is why threats toward Gulf facilities matter even when they do not produce massive damage. Bahrain is not just another small state on the map. It hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet, a central symbol of American naval power in the region. Kuwait is not just a neighbor watching from the side. Its facilities, including air bases connected to American operations, are part of the wider support system that allows Washington to project force across the Gulf. So when missile alerts appear, when Iran warns states against supporting U.S. attacks, or when regional governments prepare defenses, the message is not only military, it is political. Iran is saying to America's partners, protection comes with exposure. The closer you stand to Washington, the more you may become part of the battlefield. That creates a dilemma for Gulf states. They need American protection because they cannot easily secure the Gulf order alone. But they also know that visible cooperation with Washington can turn their ports, bases, and skies into pressure points. Their fear is not only being abandoned by America, their fear is also being dragged too deeply into America's confrontation with Iran. The part most viewers miss: Iran is not only targeting America, it is targeting the permission structure behind American power. This does not mean Gulf states will suddenly break with Washington. That would be too simple. But it does mean every escalation forces them to recalculate the price of hosting, assisting, or publicly supporting U.S. operations. But the battlefield is not only military. The fourth move is the most global: oil. Strategic move 4, oil fear, becomes strategic ammunition. Oil is where a local military exchange becomes a global political problem. A missile does not have to sink a tanker to affect the market. It only has to make traders, insurers, shipping companies, and governments believe that tomorrow may be worse than today. That is why the Strait of Hormuz is so sensitive. It is not simply water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. It is a corridor of expectation. Every day it functions normally. The world assumes energy will keep moving. But when that expectation breaks, even briefly, the price of fear enters the system. Oil markets do not wait for perfect information. They react to risk. They react to statements. They react to the possibility of disruption before disruption is fully measured. After aggressive language from Washington, reporting described Brent crude jumping more than 5%. That move was not only about barrels already lost, it was about barrels that might be delayed, insured at higher cost, rerouted, or trapped inside a wider war. This is why oil fear becomes strategic ammunition. Iran may not need to control the global energy market. It only needs to remind the world that the market passes through vulnerable geography. If shipping insurance rises, if LNG flows appear exposed, if tankers slow down, if Asian importers begin quietly recalculating supply, the pressure spreads far beyond the battlefield. Why this matters more than the headline: Iran can shake economies without winning battles. The battlefield becomes the grocery bill, the fuel pump, the inflation forecast, the central bank meeting, and the election campaign. Governments that are not firing missiles still feel the heat. This is how a regional crisis becomes a global test of stability. And this is where history becomes useful, because weaker states have used cost imposition before against stronger powers repeatedly. History does not repeat cleanly, but it often reveals patterns that headlines hide. Iran is not Vietnam. It is not North Korea. It is not Iraq. Each case is different in geography, ideology, military structure, and political objective. But there is one strategic pattern that connects them. Weaker powers sometimes survive not by defeating stronger powers, but by making control too costly to maintain. Vietnam showed the limits of punishment through escalation. The United States could bomb, deploy, and destroy on a scale Vietnam could never match. Yet battlefield superiority did not automatically translate into political success, because the weaker side turned endurance, terrain, nationalism, and time into weapons. North Korea represents a different model. It built deterrence around crisis leverage. It learned that survival can come from making any attack appear dangerously expensive. The goal is not to look stronger than America. The goal is to make the consequences of intervention look uncontrollable. Iraq and Libya offer the warning from the opposite direction. When deterrence collapses, when a state cannot impose enough cost, or when it becomes isolated enough, superior outside power can become regime-ending. That is why Iran watches these examples. Its strategy appears designed to avoid looking easy, isolated, or cheap to attack. The historical lesson is uncomfortable. Superior firepower does not automatically produce political control. That does not mean Iran is winning. It means the correct measurement is not how many targets America can hit. The measurement is whether those strikes reduce Iran's leverage or whether they feed a cycle where Iran survives, adapts, and raises the price of order. History suggests punishment works best when it changes behavior. It fails when it only proves strength while leaving the opponent's strategy intact. But if this interpretation is correct, the consequences go far beyond Iran and America. The next layer is bigger than the Gulf. Every rival of Washington is studying the cost curve. China watches this crisis through the lens of energy security. Beijing does not need an American defeat to benefit strategically. It only needs to see whether the US-led security order can still keep oil and liquefied natural gas moving without creating permanent instability. For China, the Gulf is not a distant theater. It is a supply line. Russia watches through a different lens. Overstretch. Every American ship, aircraft, interceptor, and diplomatic warning absorbed in the Gulf is attention not fully available elsewhere. Moscow understands that great powers can be weakened not only by defeat, but by constant crisis management across too many fronts. The Gulf monarchies watch with perhaps the most immediate anxiety. They depend on American protection, but they also need trade with Asia, investment stability, and diplomatic channels with Iran. Their question is not ideological, it is practical. Can Washington still provide security without turning their territory into part of the battlefield? And the global South watches the symbolism. For years, American power was presented as the force that guaranteed order. But if that power now appears to produce cycles of strike, retaliation, oil panic, and diplomatic fragmentation, then the old argument begins to weaken. Rivals do not need to prove they can replace America overnight. They only need to show that American dominance no longer guarantees stability. This is why BRICS capitals, Asian importers, Russian strategists, and Gulf rulers all read the same crisis differently. The battlefield is local, but the lesson is global. If Iran can raise the cost of control in Hormuz, others will study that method with great care and strategic precision. But a serious analysis cannot ignore the strongest argument against this entire thesis. To be fair, there is a strong argument against this. America is not a declining actor trapped helplessly in the Gulf. It remains the most capable military power in the region, with aircraft, submarines, destroyers, surveillance platforms, cyber tools, and a network of bases that Iran cannot match. If Washington decides to widen the campaign, it can destroy fixed sites, hit command nodes, degrade radar networks, intercept drones and missiles, and coordinate with allies to keep shipping lanes open. There is also the economic side. Iran is already under sanctions, already carrying domestic pressure, and already operating with limits that the United States can exploit. A long confrontation could hurt Iran's exports, currency, infrastructure, and political stability. Gulf states may feel nervous, but they also know that America remains the only outside power with the naval depth to protect the sea lanes at scale. This is the strongest counterargument. Pressure is not power if it triggers your own destruction. Iran may create risk, but risk can backfire. If Tehran escalates too far, it could unite Gulf capitals, justify heavier American strikes, and invite a level of retaliation that its economy and military infrastructure cannot easily absorb. The very tools Iran uses for leverage, drones, missiles, small boats, proxies, and threats to shipping, could become the evidence Washington needs to build a wider coalition against it. So no serious analysis should pretend Iran is controlling the board completely. It is not. America still has escalation dominance in many areas, and Iran knows the danger of crossing certain lines. The power imbalance remains real, even when the strategic dilemma becomes complicated. That argument is serious, but it does not fully answer the cost question. That is the distinction this crisis forces us to make. Saying Iran has leverage is not the same as saying Iran is stronger than the United States. It is not. America can win individual engagements, destroy targets, intercept threats, and impose painful costs. But the deeper question is whether those victories produce stable control or whether they become part of a cycle that keeps raising the price of control. This is where the metric changes. Washington may measure success by targets destroyed, missiles intercepted, vessels protected, and bases defended. Tehran may measure success differently. How many times can it force a response, shake the oil market, unsettle Gulf partners, and keep the crisis alive without crossing into full national destruction? The key distinction: America may control the strike package, but Iran may be trying to control the crisis tempo. If every U.S. strike is followed by another Iranian claim, another air defense alert, another shipping concern, another oil price reaction, and another round of diplomacy, then the crisis becomes less about who has better weapons and more about who can endure the rhythm. That is the difference between battlefield dominance and strategic exhaustion. Ceasefire language can appear one day and collapse the next. Gulf states can support American security while privately fearing escalation. Markets can calm in the morning and panic by evening. The answer will come from indicators, not slogans, and from behavior, not speeches. So what should viewers watch next to know which side of the argument is becoming true? 3 things matter now. First, watch whether American strikes remain limited to military targets or begin expanding toward command centers, infrastructure, leadership networks, or assets deeper inside Iran. Expansion would suggest Washington is moving from deterrence toward coercion. Second, watch the Gulf states. If Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or the Emirates publicly tighten cooperation with Washington, Iran's pressure may be backfiring. But if they speak more carefully, call for restraint, or create distance from American operations, that signals the permission structure is under strain. Third, watch the commercial system, tanker traffic, insurance rates, oil prices, LNG flows, and missile defense alerts. The next move to watch is not only another missile, it is whether the Gulf returns to normal or normal disappears. Watch them carefully. Because that is the real test. Not whether America can hit targets. It can. Not whether Iran can create danger. It can. The test is whether force restores order or whether every strike heats the pressure chamber further. If America is truly restoring control, why does every new strike seem to make control more expensive?